Welcome back to another episode of Jack Amplified. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite. It is my honor to be the CEO and president of Jack.org. What does that mean? It means I do the least amount of heavy lifting because we have such a great team of young and just brilliant people. I was actually telling one of our guests before as we kind of waited and we're getting ready to do this, just how inspiring our young people are. Right, that there's a lot of despair and everything. Like every time the first headlines you read, if you read the news, are always just crippling. But you know what my inspiration is when I go to work and I talk to young people who are smarter than I think I ever was at that age, more passionate, driven. They've got this. So the hope is there. We're going to do some great things on the backs, and it's my job really is just to step aside and make sure they have the tools to do their job. And so we do have one of our guests. Well, both of our guests are a heck of a lot younger than me and very inspiring. Before we get to that, I just want to talk about today's theme. And we see this across the country, around the world. We're going to talk about men and boys' mental health and explore that, right? It seems to be kind of, the stigma still exists, right? That whole be a tough guy. It's not, you're if you show any vulnerability, you're not a real man, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of barriers to men reaching out. And in fact, men are 3 times more likely to die from suicide than other genders, and less likely to reach out for support, which probably isn't a surprise to most people, but we need to do more work around that. We want to explore why that's happening and what we can do to change that trend. So today we have not one, folks, but 2 guests, and they're awesome guests too. And it's I'm excited about this podcast. First, we have Isaiah Neal with us, and Isaiah, I'm going to read your bio here because if I don't, I'm going to miss all the good stuff, right? And first of all, he is a Jack.org youth ambassador, which is awesome. He's a student athlete who's passionate about mental health advocacy and supporting youth, drawing on his experience as a student athlete and Jack Talk speaker. And our speakers are always, man, I'm always blown away at how good they are. And Isaiah is no different. So he highlights the importance of mental health awareness and inspiring positive change. Outside of all this, because he's got so much extra time outside of advocacy, he plays football for the University of Alberta Golden Bears and works with the Imagine Institute for Learning. Man, that's one sport. Someone asked me the other day, they said, would you go in for one play in the NFL for like $500,000 or one? And I said, no, man, because I don't think that's something I can walk away from. So good for you for doing that. And now we have our second guest. We have Sachin. He's the founder of Sachin in Motion and a community wellness advocate. And just for, if you don't know, he just ran across the country in like record time, doing crazy every day, running. I think it was 100K. He'll tell me, yeah, and it was insane. I mean, it would take me a whole year to run 100K, and he did that daily. He's passionate about movement and mindfulness. He shows how physical activity can support mental health, and we were just talking before this, and if you could see, it's got a blur behind him. I mean, this is like bodybuilder, jiu-jitsu, and then what the heck, let's run across the country, right, and focus on that. And we'll touch on that as well. So he does it all, but it's how physical activity can support mental health, self-discovery, and resilience. So he's based in Toronto, not this morning. He got up super early because he's not in Toronto. He leads workshops blending fitness and mental well-being, helping youth and communities build healthier and more connected lives. Guys, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having us, man.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. Of course, I read the formal bios, but I want to learn more about you both and how the heck this became important to you and how you became mental health advocates. Isaiah, we want to start with you. Tell me a little bit about your journey and how you became an advocate and why mental health is so important to you and prevention and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So I struggled a lot with anxiety starting from the time about high school. In grade 10, I was playing football. I had been playing football since I was about 9 years old. And I had an injury in grade 10 that took me out for the season. And then grade 11, same thing happened. And then grade 12, I had this immense pressure on me that really triggered this new feeling of anxiety in me. It was not something that was tolerable or something that I could hide. I always told myself, it's just game day nerves, it's normal. But it got to a place where it really wasn't normal. And that place was having anxiety attacks where that would have like heart palpitations, feeling numb in your body and so on. But at that time in grade 12, I didn't know anything about mental health. I didn't know the words anxiety, depression. And so I couldn't really talk about it or express it even if I wanted to. Now, managed to get through that 1 year, and I thought, okay, it was just a bad year. It'll never happen again. And lo and behold, when I got accepted to the University of Alberta to play, that's where everything kind of blew up in my face. Had another injury. I had a concussion, and then I got diagnosed with, or sorry, I got prescribed rather with what I like to call a deadly dose of isolation. So I had to remove myself from school, remove myself from the team, and so I was all by myself in my thoughts in those really dark places. And my wake up call was, after I had this concussion, I was super anxious about what was going to happen with my university career, and I became super depressed. And then the wake up was the feelings of feeling suicidal that I had never had in my life before. And so again, I didn't know how to even express this. Like I didn't know about therapy, didn't know about mental health, and so I remember going to a person I really trusted at the time and listing off my physical symptoms because that's how I was interpreting everything. As an athlete, it's very easy to tell your trainer or to tell anyone how you're feeling physically, but mentally that was still not a skill. But thankfully, it was enough to get the help that I needed because I got referred to a therapist, and after that, things started to really open up for me. Looking forward, I was no longer feeling the same amount of depression I was feeling, but my anxiety was still like for 5 years straight was up and down, up and down, and that was really where my love for like advocacy came really is because I felt like I'm not the only one, and that there are more people out there, and I need to not just take this experience as something that's bad that happened to me, but I need to share it. I need to help someone else because if I don't, who will?
Yeah, incredible. And that must have been scary as hell. I mean, because and we'll dive more into this, but not only, do like you have these kind of scary feelings, right, of anxiety and crippling anxiety, but you're an athlete and you're a guy. It's supposed like all those pieces, like, nah, that doesn't happen to me, right? And we want to explore that further. Before we do that, Sachin, let's talk about your journey into why is mental health so important to you, and how did you, being such a kind of all the physical things you do and being such an athlete. How did you arrive here?
Yeah, it's a great question, and Isaiah, thanks for sharing that, man. I didn't know the background fully, so appreciate that, man. Um, so for me, look, I've struggled with anxiety and depression pretty much most of my life, or what I was dealing with until about 5 years ago. Because I'm 47, so a bit of a different generation than Isaiah, and growing up, I also grew up in a South Asian household where speaking about mental health wasn't really a conversation that we have. And the type of household I grew up in also expressed various different discipline procedures. Um, so, those added to certain type of elements living in the household. So, having said that, I eventually, in my late 20s, I got into law enforcement and worked in law enforcement for the last 20 years. And through that, also experienced various different things within the workplace that exasperated my mental health. And in that environment, I guess people, use the word alpha male or that, aggressive male. And I was that guy, right? And never spoke about my feelings, had, that hard charger kind of mentality. Some might say intimidating. And, but, that's quickly and abruptly changed in about 2019, 2020, where I was really I didn't even know what I was dealing with, to be honest. It was just, I was feeling, now I know it was severe anxiety and depression, was going through a divorce, and then the pandemic kicks off. And then 18, 19, 20 years of working in law enforcement all kind of culminated at the same time. And full disclosure, I couldn't handle it. I uh, I ended up having a major depressive episode. Essentially, what that is months without sleeping. 2, 3 hours a night. Um, Mental fog. Like all the things that you can, memory loss, like all the different types of things that are associated to it. And I was working full time, so I was working 10 hour shifts, sleeping 2 hours. I was a canine handler, so running the dog, and then going to so all the things were kind of happening at the same time, and I just couldn't take it. I had a breakdown, saw the physician, ended up getting diagnosed with major depressive disorder and medication, and started seeking therapy. All these types of things started happening, and I was like, "Oh, look, I never experienced any of these things. Never got therapy." And then I hit probably the lowest point ever in my entire life, where I did have some thoughts that were not the best in terms of as it related to like suicidal ideation, and but more the entry piece of that, like just kind of, oh man, maybe it would be better if I wasn't here, like saying things like that, like real basic but dangerous. Yeah. And so from there, I was like, man, I got to do something, because if I don't do something here, it's gonna be a wrap. And that's where I started exploring other options rather than just focusing on the traditional methods of helping with my mental health, i.e., medication and psychology and all that kind of stuff. I started exploring a more holistic perspective, not eliminating those things, but adding in other things. And through that process, I started running at that time. I hadn't been a runner. I hadn't ran since high school, so probably 35 years earlier was the last time I ran, and started running small amounts. And as you can see, it was a bodybuilder, so it was a lot bigger, and it was real challenging. And stuck with it. In a short period of time, I ended up seeing how the running was helping me from a mental health perspective, and what it was doing, what it was giving me. Because I had low self-worth at the time, confidence, all of those things were really in the dumps. And as I started running for myself, I started observing myself doing things I never thought I could do. And that elevated me. So as I saw that, I was like, wow, maybe there's something here I could leverage to help other people. And that's what kind of started the process of me doing advocacy work, where in 2021, I trained myself to run 100 kilometers, and I ran from it. And I'm actually in the Vancouver area, not in Toronto. That's why the time shift. So I live in the Vancouver area, and I ran from a town called Chilliwack, British Columbia, to the Vancouver airport, which was 100 kilometers. And I ran that 100K in under 15 hours and raised $21,000 for mental health charities for veterans and first responders. And after I did that, that's what kind of opened up the door for me to kind of express myself through that way. And I continued year after year. I would do a physical running challenge, um, a massive one, where I would be able to learn how to do social media, create more awareness, do some fundraising, and then help myself at this time and help other people. So in 2022, I ran 9 ultramarathons in 9 months, raised $16,000 for the Honor House Society. And then the following year after that, I ran 22 consecutive marathons in 22 days, running across British Columbia, ran from Revelstoke, BC to Victoria, over 1,000 kilometers, and raised $20,000 in those 20 days or 22 days. And then last year, I ran 60 kilometers a day for 60 days around the lower mainland of British Columbia, various different cities, and raised 25,000 for mental health initiatives across the country. And then ultimately brought me to this year, where I was executed a goal that was 5 years in the making, where I started planning it before I had even ran a 1 kilometer. I was like, okay, now I'm prepared, run across the country. The original plan was to run 100 kilometers a day and to run across the entire country and to challenge the speed record, which Dave Proctor holds, 106 kilometers a day for 67 days, 10 hours. And so for me, that was the goal, right? And as I started planning this goal, I started understanding what that goal entailed, and it started changing and evolving. Because my ultimate goal and purpose was to raise awareness and funds, not to pump my own tires and be in the record books. And so as I started going through this, I started recognizing, oh, if I want to, get the speed record, I have to take a certain route. And that certain route takes me away from the GTA and various other populated areas. Well, that's not good for raising awareness and funds. So I was like, okay, we're not doing that now. We're changing it because we need to engage more people. And then kept planning. And then, within the first week of the run, probably the first 3 days, I started recognizing, wait a second, we really need to change this, the way we had planned this out. Because I had this RV, and it was basically a moving billboard of mental health. And as I was running, within the first 3 days, people were stopping us on the highway, on the side of the roads, wanted to have conversations, wanted to engage in talking about mental health. They were shocked to see someone doing that with that kind of vehicle. And it was just like it was a lightning bolt. And as we saw that, I said to the team, I go, okay, we got to change, man, because like we're running past people, we're not running to them. If I'm gonna run 100K a day, I can't talk to anybody. I have to keep plugging away, and that's defeating the purpose of what we're trying to do here. It's not about me pumping my tires. I was really trying to focus on other people, not myself. So 5 years of planning pivoted within the first 3 days to, okay, we're running 50K a day. We're doing half the amount, and that'll allow me the mental bandwidth to be able to sit, have conversation, and still talk to people and hold space if they need to offload whatever their burden is to us. So yeah, then we switched to 50K a day, and then held space for people. And that's how we were able to have over 5,000 different conversations with various different types of people across the country. So sorry, I took a lot of time there
No,
to
man.
give the background, but I felt it was necessary to kind of give a full context of where I was to where I am today.
I love it. And I love how you're like just 50K, just 50, eh? Just a little more than a marathon a day. Just scaled it back. It's so interesting. Like I took a lot out of it. And thank you so much to have the courage to share. And we appreciate that. It's interesting with policing as well. And we could dive more into that too. Probably about 15 years ago, um, a guy I grew up with. I didn't know, like we weren't friends, but friendly. He was star. He actually played for Acadia out east, played football, and then he made the CFL. Good looking guy, like just tons of friends. Was a police officer and sadly died by suicide on Christmas Eve, right? And that shock of always when that happens, it shouldn't be the cop, but him, like what? Like I can't understand. I think we have a different picture in our head, right? Like that guy was an athlete. He was, that whole, again. And when his parents talked about then, and I think it's changed a little bit, but Sacha, you could tell me different. In policing, his worry was he didn't want to tell anyone he was going through major depression because he was afraid he was going to get benched, and he didn't want to ride a desk, right? Like that's what, and it was like if I tell, and so his parents took a tragedy and really became advocates for mental health and policing and having more people, police officers, actually disclose without the fear of their job being changed. I don't know if
I
that's your
mean,
experience.
it's that's been my experience for 5 years because I've my first focus has been veterans and first responders struggling with occupational stress injuries, and that's what I've been doing for 4 years. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. The mental health related issues as it relates to the emergency responder spaces are worse than general population. Um, in 2011, a study was conducted in the United States that revealed 22 veterans a day commit suicide. And that's in the United States only. And so if you were to incorporate emergency personnel, policing, firefighters, paramedics, and Canada, that number skyrockets to well over 75 to 100 people a day. And so it's a huge issue, and that was my experience as well. I was a hard charger, man. I didn't talk about anything but for my feelings, this, that, and the other. It got to a point where my mental health was so significantly affected that my tools were removed. So when your tools are removed from the employer, that means your pistol, your baton, all the things that are required. And why would they do that? Well, a fear that your mental health is in such a position that, something's going on. Now, what people might not understand or know in as a general population is that what that might even do to someone's mental health even more, right? Because in the law enforcement world, military world, specifically, people identify themselves with their uniform. There's no delineation, or the delineation is very small, right? So I'm a cop, I'm a firefighter, I'm a paramedic, not I'm a father, I'm a brother, I'm a husband. It's very different. But when you remove the things that who you are as you identify with, then your mental health drops even further. So that's where my work's been in the last 4 years, is trying to raise that awareness and being a voice for those people.
Wow, thank you. Now, listen, you mentioned when you're going across the country, which was incredible, the 5,000 conversations. One of those conversations you had was with this young man here, Isaiah. Isaiah, you went and met Sasha in Alberta, like you to do that. Why was that so important? Why? What led you to do that, to make the cross?
Yeah, for sure. So it actually goes back to January of this year. I was walking home and I texted my wife and I was like, I'm really bored. And she's like, okay. And I was like, yeah, I want to spice things up. And I don't know what she had in mind when I said that, but I was like, yeah, I want to run a half marathon. And she's like, oh, okay. And so in January, I started training for this half marathon and like really got into running. And like Sach said, like it's incredible. Running is incredible for your mental health and, any physical health is. But, I was just running, starting to like learn techniques and things like that and just got really fascinated with in general. And then I saw that Satch was running across the country for mental health. And it was like both my two passions at the time just like fell into place. And I was like, this is so cool. And so, I never even really had any intention on like going to meet him. I was looking at his route and thinking, okay, am I here? Am I there? And nothing was really lining up at first. And I went camping one weekend in Lacombe and saw that Satch was going to be in Calgary like the next day. And I was like, okay, like I'm literally not even 2 hours away. Like, let's just go and, meet him and like see what's up. And I, went down to Calgary and I was just like, bubbling, busting at the seams, and he came out of the RV, and I was like, "Oh my God, it's Satch!" Like there was so much momentum that had built up before that, and for me, it was really like, yes, of course, it was like running and mental health were coming together, my two loves at the time, and still now. But it was like the importance that like there was a man of color that was running across the country for mental health, and I feel like that was just a statement in of itself. And so it's like how many like we talk about Terry Fox, we talk about great people, celebrities, athletes, but actually seeing it in real time in your generation is like one of a kind. And so it's kind of hard to miss.
100%. It is so. I want to stick with you for a second, Isaiah. You talked about, it took a long time, right? You suffered for a long time before kind of seeking help or understanding and doing that. And one of the things at Jack.org that we are big on is saying like we have to have these conversations earlier on. If we're trying to change this, build this ecosystem, right? That if young people, you would have said to, or one of your buddies would have called you out on it and said, "Say, man, you're not showing up." But they're like, I haven't seen you in 2 weeks. What the hell's going on? That's not like you. Talk to me and really listen. Do you think that would have made a difference? Like, what role do you think prevention could have changed in your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. To be completely honest, if somebody asked me like, "Hey, like what's going on?" I probably would have told them it's fine. Um, for the pure fact that I think in the beginning I really didn't understand what was going on, so I didn't know what to say. And then near kind of like the second half, it was more so like, I don't want to burden you, I don't want to like be a problem. And that wasn't just like the stigma on my team, that was even with my parents and people around me. I didn't want to be a problem. I wanted to be independent. I didn't want to ask for help. But in terms of just overall prevention, I think like even if people were consistently probing me the question of like, hey, something is up, and even if I said fine, it would have like I definitely believe that it would force me to think, hey, something is actually wrong here, and everyone's noticing it, and you're choosing just to ignore it. And so I think just that simple question of, hey, like, what's up? How's it going? Would have been enough to maybe get me to therapy or get me the help that I needed faster.
Or I'm thinking, or like one of your friends, like if you saw that one of your friends had, I think quite often is when you actually do disclose and you say, I'm feeling this way. And a friend says, yeah, shit, me too. Like 100%. I've been through that every day. And like, whoa, I'm not alone. There's other, especially, I don't know, like we talked about policing in the athletic world, which both you and Sacha would know. Like, did that play into it at all? Like, I'm this athlete, I'm this, like, what role did that kind of play into you, into your head anyways, of not, of saying I'm fine? And
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was mostly around just the notion of being mentally fortified and strong, and that's what you believe athletes have to be. And that's what you see as a kid. Like so and so is big and strong, so and so never drops the ball, so and so is always perfect. And we don't actually show them that a lot of those pro athletes, they have a meditation routine. They have like things that are keeping them mentally resilient behind the scenes, but we don't see that. And so we think that they just show up on Sunday morning and just do what they do, and it doesn't take any effort. And so you're always trying to be that guy, you're always trying to just be perfect, trying to perform well, and you don't want to ask for help. And so I think that's just a general stigma in sport that definitely played on my mind, and the number one reason probably why I didn't ask for help.
very cool. And that, and you, I say you did mention a bit of with Sacha being a person of color running across the country. And such. You also mentioned that the culture piece too. I mean, maybe both. We'll start with you, Sachin. You talk about like what role did you layer all these pieces on. I mean, for you, right? You're an athlete. You're a police officer. So all these kind of, and then you layer on the culture piece too. Could you talk a little bit about that, and also what role that played?
My experience in the athletic realm, I didn't have the same experience as Isaiah, where on the jujitsu mats is very different, and it's a brotherhood and a sisterhood. So when you're rolling, you develop friendships. So it's not just an athletic endeavor; it's also a connection endeavor where you're having conversation. So for me, if I was dealing with something, I would, from time to time say it. In the bodybuilding world, it's kind of similar too. So when I'd be lifting with my buddies, you're talking, you're connecting. So my experience was maybe a little bit different. And then from the South Asian perspective, that I think probably has more of a impact than the athletic, at least in my experience. Um, talking about specific things as it related to mental health, I don't think it was like my parents didn't were embarrassed. They didn't have that vibe where like, oh, don't talk about it, it's not good. It was more of like they didn't get it. They just didn't understand. Like if I was crying and I didn't like man, I didn't even get it, right? Like if I'm as a kid, I remember man, it was so many times after and look, I was a South Asian kid, grew up in London, Ontario, and then Toronto as a young boy. And back then it wasn't as diverse it is now. So, getting my butt kicked almost every day, getting bullied, all that kind of stuff was normal, right? And so the battle was maybe a little bit different for me, where I'd come home and the conversation I'd have with my parents was like, I'm getting bullied. Okay, what are you going to do to stand up for yourself? How are you going to make it was a different conversation. And if I were crying or feeling sad for whatever, oh, I didn't get asked out, or I never dated because, no one wanted to date me until much later in uh, because I was so shy and I never really connected because I was getting bullied. All these different types of things would happen, right? And so, as a kid in elementary school, I'd come home crying or just in bed, just going before bed, I'd be upset or something. My parents just couldn't understand what was happening. So they were more frustrated with the inexperience or not understanding how to help. So that was my experience as it came related to the South Asian experience. And then as I'm, going through life and even for the run across Canada, one thing that was very surprising for me was the lack of um, support or at least involvement from the South Asian community. Um, and I think, and not because South Asians are very supportive people and very financially supportive in various different types of ways from donation perspectives, but I think they just didn't understand what I was doing in terms of running across the country because the support that I got from Canadians in general was great, but for my specific community, it was like crickets. So that was something that was very interesting to experience, and I'm trying to understand what that reasoning is. And I think a lot of it is just not understanding the mental health issues, because in the community itself, alcohol abuse is out through the roof, domestic violence is through the roof, and a lot of people, if you were to talk to them, they say, "Oh, I don't have any mental health issues," where it's so rampant. So I think they just don't understand what's going on and how to articulate it.
Yeah. Isaiah, what about how about for you?
Yeah, I think for me, race and just my identity has been kind of an interesting journey. I heard one person explain it like, a person I met through school. She was from Africa, and I think she's from Southern Africa, like Zimbabwe or something like that. And she came over and she said, "I became black when I came to Canada." I was like, "Wow, that makes so much sense," because you know I remember growing up, my mom is Caucasian, my dad is black, and for the longest time, like I would have some people say, "Oh, you're so whitewashed," and then other people would say, "Oh, you're so black," and I'm like, "Okay, so like, what am I, right? Where do I fit in?" And so I think growing up, it was like I just became myself, and race was like not really prevalently on my mind. But when it became prevalently on my mind is when I used to get bullied for it. I get picked on. I was like, oh, okay, this is I guess who I am. I'm a person of color. And going into my even my mental health journey, I feel like lots of people I think say you know people in the BIPOC community, the mental health conversation is taboo, but I think it's more like what Saj said as well. Like, it's not that they're not supportive, it's like they don't know how to talk about it. And I don't even think it's right to say that they're horrible for that, because I feel like there's other things in our culture that we have forgotten about that still address the mental health piece. It's just not addressed in the same way that we do in North America. And I feel like those are kind of the things that I've realized as a black individual, that mental health is something that is so unique and personal to each person, and it's about how do you deal with it. So for me, I never had parents that really talked about it. And for my mom, I think that was strictly just because she grew up on a farm in a rural conservative area. And then for my dad, it was definitely because his community as a a black Caribbean Canadian was not talked about. So I think that absence due to culture was a big thing for me, and the reason why I didn't know anything about mental health.
Yes, thank you both for that. And that you'll see a thing like the first couple of guests we had on here talked about that. No one is pointing fingers. In fact, they're saying exactly the same thing. You just don't know, right? So you're working to change. Part of it too is they talked about, and we see this is that. And my wife's Ecuadorian, and a lot of it is like family deals with family things. So you don't go outside of family. We take care of that, and we take care of each other because we don't want to be a burden, that kind of thing. And I'll tell you, like, so my wife's mother, when she was older, like was really needing like more need than the family could provide, and to convince them to allow her to leave the home and get like it was like the shame that someone else would, that kind of thing. It was tough on them, right? But eventually they came around. So there's the family pieces uh, to it as well, right? And I like when I grew up too. I grew up in the '80s, um, and '70s and '80s, and my mom had a breakdown when she was 40, and talk about like I mean, my dad's British. She was hospitalized, but I was just angry because I didn't get it. Just like basically snap out of it. What are you doing? And because it was like it was intentional or purposeful, right? Because no one was talking about it, so we had no idea. It was like it was a choice. But I will say this about you. You've talked a great deal, or you talk a great deal, Sacha, about um, the importance of physical health with your mental health and how the two are linked. It's kind of funny. So I've been working out since I was 13. And I have a distinct advantage to you and Isaiah in that I am not athletic whatsoever, so there's no pressure. I'm a terrible athlete. I just have no talent. But I worked out. Exercise has always been, and people will say to me, it's not really about the gym. Like, why do you work out every day? Like, because my competing days or doing anything like that, or not that there ever was, are far behind me. But I know if I don't do that most mornings, I'm off. Like it just has centered me, and I was doing that before I knew that it actually, you know what I mean? I was doing that and just thinking, and if I didn't do it, something's missing, not realizing that it's more of a mental piece than physical was, has ever been. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, about kind of that connection, physical and mental health that you talk a lot about.
Yeah, it's a great question, I think, and I think not enough people really truly understand the relationship between the two because they really separate them. Physical health is mental health. It absolutely is. And and I'm not saying that like just frivolously. It's scientifically proven that the physical activity, depending on what type it is and how frequently and how challenging it is for you, builds new neural pathways in your brain. It builds mental capacity. It builds resilience. Like that's a natural way to build resilience without going through really troubling times in life, right? And so you can kind of create an environment for yourself that can develop yourself both physically and mentally. And I'm a case study, to be honest. If someone were to really ask me questions, I'm a different human being today than I was 5 years ago, in part because of the extreme physical challenges I've put myself through has forced my brain neuroplasticity change and create through post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic growth, right? So the brain is actually healed and it's recovered and it's actually smarter than it used to be. So that was because of extreme physical activity and voluntarily doing things that I didn't want to do. I don't like running. I absolutely don't like it. And maybe it's other people, and I say that and people laugh, and it is funny if you think about it. But there are people out there that are passionate about running. I am not. I freaking hate it. Every moment of it, I don't like it. But for me, it was a means to an end to be able to execute against a goal and help other people as a tool to inspire in some kind of way. I could do it. Somebody who's terrible at running, doesn't like it, who can get himself out from the depths of despair and mentally become somebody else. Man, anybody could do it. And I am not the greatest runner. Like Isaiah, I bet you is a million times better than me. Um, and he's gone a lot further in such a shorter amount of time than I did in the amount of time that I put into it. So I think people really should consider, if they're not physically active in any way, to start employing some physical activity in their life. They'll see a huge difference in not only their mental health, but how their brain is functioning.
100%. Isaiah, what about you? Like, what role has that athleticism working around all those pieces played in your mental health?
Yeah, I guess before I go into it, thanks, Sash, for the nice compliment. What's funny is actually I used to always get teased for how I run. Like all the guys would be like, you run, like, why do you run so like strong? Like I was a very stiff runner, and so yeah, that's the first time I've heard something like that. So thanks, appreciate that. But in terms of physical exercise and just mental health, I guess I'll put it this way. One of the things that I really appreciated about sport, apart from just game day, was the process. I loved off season because it just got you mentally right and just got you ready for the season apart from just being physically ready, but mentally ready. Because when you're waking up at 5 a.m. to be on a field for 6 o'clock, like that will definitely get you, ready for anything. Um, but when I noticed that was like a really big thing for me was during COVID when the season was no longer and we weren't like training, we weren't doing any normal workouts, and that's when I really felt my mental health really take a turn because I was always in a desk, I was always in my bed, I wasn't up and about like I usually was, and so when I got back, I really noticed that shift of like, hey, this is actually what's keeping me going. It's not even so much like the sport itself; it's just the physical exercise of it. And so now for me, like even being out of sport for the last like 2 years, I still am at the gym 4 to 5 times a week. And I notice when I'm not there that, I'm much more anxious. I'm much more like unfocused and things like that. And so physical exercise is a big thing for me.
Can I just jump in real
Yeah,
quick,
of
if you don't
course.
mind? Just build off a little. I just said, I think what people are missing when we're saying physical activity, they're not truly understanding what we're saying. Perhaps in some occasions, because people see only the physical act. They're not understanding all the steps required to get to that physical act and post physical act. And so, what does that require? That requires discipline, dedication, effort, planning, all many, many, many things that require you to do to be able to perform for that 1 hour. So, what are one of those things that are super important for your mental health? Sleep, right? And so, if you're getting a great amount of sleep for your recovery from a physical perspective, whoa, now you're actually helping your brain out, right? And now, if you're physical and you're athletic, how do you perform better? Oh, by nutrition. So if you're eating better, your activities, the byproduct, your brain is going to be functioning better. So there are a lot of things out there that I think people are really not understanding. Those who aren't physically active, which is a huge number of people out there, we're meant to be physically active. We're not using the tools that are what our bodies have been created to do, which is to be physically active, to move. And if we're not moving, look, I'm not saying run across the country, but what I am saying is just get up and go for an hour, walk, do something which will start getting the ball rolling in terms of, oh, well, I want to walk faster. Maybe I want to start running. And then you start employing other things. So I just want to add that little piece because I think, someone might look at Isaiah or might look at me and be like, oh, these guys are athletes. We can't do what they're doing. I want this is very accessible to anybody. You don't have to do anything super extreme. You just have to start doing something and then build off on it.
Yeah, I don't know whether to be hurt or not that you didn't include me in that. With they're looking at me saying that too, but
So
I
to
could
me,
I could see where
well,
um they're not looking at you saying that. Listen, what and 100% what you're saying, emotion is big, right? And it's a piece of it. And I'll tell you something too. We used to take I spent a lot of time in youth homelessness and housing, right? And for young people, so we do this thing where we take adults, sometimes police officers, like police chief and different people in February, and the young people who had experienced homelessness, with lived experience, would write up something to say, here's what I had to do. Yeah, and so they'd all have to go out and do this, like $2 and a bus ticket. They'd have to go out. And you talk about mental health, you talk about sleep, nutrition, all those pieces. It was one night, and all these adults would go out and try and live kind of one night on the streets, experiencing homelessness. And then what we'd do is we'd say, like a lot of young people do, they go to school the next day, or they try and function because the shame, they don't want people to know. And what a mess, and they would all talk about what a mess they were mentally because they didn't get a good night's sleep. They were all over, and I'm like, that's one night. Imagine doing that night after night after night. If you don't have things like housing, you don't have food, you're in an environment you don't feel safe. That's why young people walk around all night, right? And then they might sleep at school, then they get misjudged as being lazy, where they're like, finally, I feel almost safe, so I can sleep here. But your mental health in one night. So if that's happening night after night after night, that kind of thing. And as well, why you might self medicate as well. I want to bring it back to, we want to talk about and get your thoughts around. You had, 5,000 conversations or more across the country. What in those conversations did you learn? And you think that what is the change in how we're addressing mental health right now, especially among young men?
yeah, there were three things that we identified as a team that if people would start using in their life, they'd probably make a pretty big dent in their mental health. Now, not from a mental illness perspective, you could probably help out, but from a mental health, overall general wellness is what I'm talking about. And that is community connection and movement. Those three things is what we identified. And how did we identify that? Is by having these thousands of conversations and from the people that we spoke to. If you had a good friend, someone you could trust or have a conversation with, or a family member, a loved one, or one of these types of things, you were actually in the 1% of the entire country. If you had a close family member, a spouse that you could trust, close relationships, they were very rare if one person had all of these things. And so I think that was one thing that stands out: community, connection, and movement. We're too isolated these days, I think, and we're not as integrated within communities. So that's what I noticed.
Thank you. And thanks for that. And right on, I think all three. Isaiah, what about yourself? Like, what do you think has to change as an ambassador as you talk about this and your passion around both kind of sport, athleticism, and mental health? What has to change moving forward so maybe people don't have to struggle as long?
I think I can agree by saying that mental health needs to be seen as physical health. There should be like the whole idea of like, am I really feeling this? Is this really real? Needs to really change. And I think that starts with when we talk about mental health, we need to take it as serious as physical health. I mean, when you read like first aid books, if you get a cut, you're supposed to like do all these things, and it's like it's kind of overboard, right? But it's like we don't do that for our mental health. Why? Because we don't think of it as serious. So I'll start off by saying that is the whole idea of the importance of mental health needs to change. The other thing that I think that really needs to change is the supports for mental health. They need to be way more universal and much more structured rather than just relying on these I guess organizations that are like running on funding and the support of the community. This needs to be something that is as solidified as physical health. There should be no question that if you're dealing with depression, suicidal ideation, that you can get professional support right away, just as fast as you could for a doctor. And then I guess the last piece that I'll add that also ties into to the sports, that what needs to change in sport is that we need to understand that mental health is like, the emotion. I'll change the word, not mental health, but emotional intelligence is something that needs to be taught at a very young age, whether you're in sport or just in school. Like teaching youth how to identify their emotions, how to recognize when they're feeling down versus when they're feeling up is so important, because when you're able to catch those feelings in yourself, that's where you can actually catch it at a time where you can do something about it and you're not in a crisis, weeks down the road.
Yeah, well, and you kind of, I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're also talking about like that early intervention prevention, right? Like I think about, you talked about it, you would have just said, hey, I'm fine. But if your friends had, I think of some of the stuff we're trying to do with Jack.org, and listen, this is not a giant infomercial for the organization, but it's also that you don't accept that. You're like, no, you're not. Like you come at, like, I know you, and you push, come on, man. Like, and I'm here if you want to talk, just even hearing that too. Right. And I wonder too, for Sachin as a police officer too, if someone would have said, this is not you. Like, this is not you, or there's something more at play here. And it's interesting because we're taking, I've only been with the organization a short time. We have this Be There certificate, right? Where people take the certificate, and it's kind of peer to peer. So if I knew this, they would, like, if Isaiah's friends, or if Isaiah took this when he was younger, they might be able to self-identify or identify in others early on. That's not right. And you have these conversations, very simple, right? But what we've discovered is that adults that are working with youth, adults should take this too, right? Because it makes you a better coworker, especially among young people, right? It makes you, and we've talked actually with police departments, because they're investing a lot in the crisis response. But what about that prevention response, right? Like at the very beginning, if I see this with either a youth that I'm chatting to on the street, that there's something more at play here, or youth that you get to know through the community, or your coworkers too, where you're like, man, this isn't normal, or this isn't how they are. Let's stay away from that word. This isn't. I'm noticing them acting differently than they would. They're not showing up at things. They're not coming out. They're spending a lot more time kind of in their basement, those kinds of things. And I love the Be There. That's just simplistic too. I just wondering your thoughts around that kind of early intervention prevention. Should there be more focus there?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing I just want to get a bit of clarity. I wasn't a police officer. I worked for the Canada Border Services Agency. Well, it was Immigration and Customs Enforcement. But having said that, it's emergency response, and I've been very connected to police and communities and very communities, so very in tune with what's going on. And what I'm hearing from both of you guys, from a really 30,000 foot view, is really talking about leadership, right? Like from a leader perspective, what does a good leader do? He observes people and watches. And if there's a change of behavior, that leader is engaging to have a conversation. Hey man, what's going on, bud? I noticed that you're showing up late to work, or oh hey man, I know that you're coming in late to practice, or whatever it is. And now, how do you get everyone to do that? The reality is, in my experience, not everyone will do that, and it requires certain types of people who are empathetic to others, and who now it's a matter of trying to cultivate that skill set in people. And that's the challenge, I think. Now, in from a work environment, like in law enforcement, absolutely people talk about observing each other. And if someone's feeling off, not even from a supervisor perspective, but from a colleague perspective, I did that all the time. And, like I would just, I, whether that be the work I was in, I observed people's behaviors normally, just naturally. And if something was different, I would just engage and say, hey, what's up, man? And that's all it took, really. But from an intervention perspective, I think that's super important. Now, in the law enforcement space, why does that become a challenge? Because people are burnt out, and people are engaging with people all day, every day, and there gets to a point where you shut off. And so now you're shut off to your colleagues. And so I think that's where some of the issue comes in, where, the interventions are really not being employed, because I think in my incidents, it definitely wasn't. And I was very vocal, and I was I was telling people, hey man, I'm not doing good. And no, people would like walk the other way. So it was very interesting. Actually, I share one quick story. it was towards the last little bit when I was really struggling in the workplace with my mental health. And I was a dog handler, so I'm walking with my dog through the carousel area when you arrive in international arrivals, and I'm walking with the dog, and one of my other canine partners was walking in a different direction. And naturally, what you say, "Hey, man, how you doing?" Right? Like, natural sort of thing. And so he asked me, "Hey, man, how you doing?" And I I'd say, "Hey, man, I'm not good." And he kept walking. So, and not that he was a bad guy, he just didn't know what to do. And or maybe his emotional bank was just too full. I think people like us should continue talking about when I say people like us. And I truly mean that. Like, I think it's an obligation on my part to share and speak as much as I possibly can, because I may be that quintessential guy that you might think, oh, he's not going to say anything. He's good. He's a tough dude. Why would he say anything? Okay, cool. Well, I'll break that stigma. Yeah, is who's going to say anything to me? So I have a different perspective on it because I'm not scared at all because like I know how to fight, I know how to run, I know how to lift, I know how to speak, I know how to do a lot of things. And so I'm confident within myself. If someone were to say, "Hey man, you're being a big baby." Okay, bro. I just ran across the country. What are you talking about? That kind of interaction. So it breaks it right away, and then I can engage directly. So that is my job, at least as I see it. Be the best version of myself so I can interject as much as I possibly can.
It's important though. I mean, both of you are athletes, are kind of what, you would be defined as, athletic, manly men, whatever, and you're speaking out. And that says a lot to break stigma, right? Because what we've learned with young people, it's about relatability. And that's why when like our Jack Talk speakers go into schools, it's important that they're younger, right? So if I go in there, it's like talking to my kids, right? They're like, it doesn't matter what I say. It's because it's me. It's it's parked or whatever, old man. Like, and if their friends tell them the same thing, because they can't relate to me. Like, how could you? And I've had my kids like when their first jobs are like, you have no idea. I'm like, well, kind of like I did have a first like I do, but it doesn't matter. But if they're friends, so who cares? They need it. But an athlete to athlete, if you're telling them that, you guys have credibility because you're an athlete, because you know what I've gone through it. I remember talking to, do you guys, I don't know if you know who Shane Corson is. So Shane Corson um, is a former professional hockey player for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And in the early 2000s, uh, publicly disclosed he was struggling with his mental health when no one was like, oh man. And Sasha, your point about, I mean, one reason that he didn't take any grief from it because he was kick their ass. Like he was a tough guy, right? So no one's gonna, But it was really. And I talked to Shane, so we play in these hockey helps homeless games, and I said to him, not only was Shane, struggling with his mental health, that he said he wore glasses like bubbles glasses, like he could barely see, right? And so, but again, knowing when he would take out his contacts and put these on after a game, people were like, what the hell, and he said no one would ever say anything. But I asked him, I said, that was like the bravest thing because no one was talking about it. I'm sure hockey players are not known for backing off and not chirping on the eye, whatever. And I said, did you get, he said, no. He said, people were really respectful on it because I think he kind of broke that mold where people were like, oh man, feeling the same way, etc. Anyways, now listen, I've taken up a lot of your time. You guys are both very busy people doing great things. I want to end with a final question for both of you. Isaiah, I'll start with you. Um, and this is a very hopeful podcast, right? It's not about like, here's all the negative stuff happening. And the question is like, what are your hopes for the future of mental health across Canada? And then I'll throw it over to you, Sach.
Yeah, I would like to really see universal mental health care. That's like something I've been really thinking about a lot. I know it's a very complex situation, but I think even more than that, I would just like to see the needs of Canadians met. I mean, like less people on the street, like people being able to afford their basic needs. Because what we don't realize is that we can cut a huge percentage, I think, out of the picture when it comes to people struggling with their mental health that are just not getting their basic needs, and that is totally doable. I don't know how to do mental health care universally, but I can give you a couple ideas on how to get a couple of people off the street and give them their basic needs. So I think that's going to be huge in the future coming up.
Well said. Well said. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess for me, I like to this is kind of how my MO, the way I function. I like to focus on things that I can control the outcome to, or at least my sphere of influence. And so, and in my younger years, I used to think I want to change this, change that, do this, do that. Now I understand with a little bit of wisdom and time that I want to focus directly on things that I can control and have access to and make some changes. So I'm extremely positive for the future because, when we have people like Isaiah, Jack.org, Michael, you, um, people like me who are focused on what we can actually do and then just spend our time and effort working on those things, the outcome is going to be great. So I'm positive. I feel like with organizations like Jack.org, the youth is in good hands, right? Like in terms of like mentoring and guiding and leadership for the future. So I'm positive. I know things may look bleak from time to time, but if we step off of social for a minute, man, you'll actually see how awesome things are. And I just want to leave with this. I ran across the entire country and I saw this country like probably no one else, not very many people can. And what I saw was hope, man. I did not experience one bit of racism, one bit of exclusion, one bit of hate. I experienced what Canadians actually are, which are gracious, grateful, and welcoming. Because I was invited in people's homes to have dinners and stuff. So, uh, listen, it's a hopeful place, and I think we should remain hopeful, positive, focus on what you can control, and get to work.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for taking the time. I love ending on that hopeful piece. Like, yes, we're changing the conversation, and today when we're talking about changing the conversation among young men and men, you're both examples of how you could do that, right? Of people that face and continue, I'm sure, to face at times mental health challenges, but you've risen up and not only have kind of found your way through, but are helping others as you go forward. You're lifting those up around you and giving that handout. So thank you both so much for your courage to share, for all you do day in, day out as we try and change the future around mental health for youth across Canada. It's so appreciated.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Nice.
Well, what an incredible, I could have talked to both these guys for hours, right? Just the different stories, and they're both so positive and helpful. And, I think one of the takeaways you see from all our podcasts is it's not about finger pointing, right? We're not saying here's who's not doing what and who's there. We're really saying, here are things in addition, and here's how we could change that path moving forward. It's about people sharing and saying, this was my journey. It doesn't have to be yours, but if it is, here's some of the things I learned, right? As Sasha said, you don't have to run across the country to do that, right? But just start moving. And I think that's the takeaway from today too, is just start moving. Physical health plays a piece. Listen, there is not one magic piece of go for a run and everything's going to be great, but go for a run would probably be a little better, right? Even if you're just moving one step forward because you're moving forward. Another incredible episode with two incredible people doing inspiring work across the country. Make sure you share the podcast everywhere where you find podcasts, on social, etc. And let's keep moving forward and making sure that we keep that focus as we do on Jack.org on those early interventions and preventions. Hey, listen, I'm not saying that we don't need crisis supports. Of course we do. But how many people can be diverted from falling into crisis if we just give people, and we heard that today from both Isaiah and Sasha, that if some of the people around them, actually, it's not that they didn't their intentions were great or they didn't want to, they just didn't know how, right? And that's the story really of how Jack.org came around, is that young Jack's friends really, they could tell somebody was off, didn't know what to do or didn't know how to support, and we're changing that moving forward. I hope you leave today's podcast with a lot of hope. Until next time, we'll see you again on Jack Amplify.